Now we'll go ahead and listen in live.
My fellow Americans, tonight I'd like to talk with you about immigration. For more than 200 years, our tradition of welcoming immigrants from around the world has given us a tremendous advantage over other nations. It's kept us youthful, dynamic, and entrepreneurial. It has shaped our character as a people with limitless possibilities. People not trapped by our past, but able to remake ourselves as we choose. But today, our immigration system is broken, and everybody knows it. Families who enter our country the right way and play by the rules watch others flout the rules. Business owners who offer their workers good wages and benefits see the competition exploit undocumented immigrants by paying them far less. All of us take offense to anyone who reaps the rewards of living in America without taking on the responsibilities of living in America. And undocumented immigrants who desperately want to embrace those responsibilities see little option but to remain in the shadows or risk their families being torn apart. It's been this way for decades. And for decades, we haven't done much about it. When I took office, I committed to fixing this broken immigration system. And I began by doing what I could to secure our borders. Today, we have more agents and technology deployed to secure our southern border than at any time in our history. And over the past 6 years, illegal border crossings have been cut by more than half. Although this summer there was a brief spike in unaccompanied children being apprehended at our border, the number of such children is now actually lower than it's been in nearly 2 years. Overall, the number of people trying to cross our border illegally is at its lowest level since the 1970s. Those are the facts. Meanwhile, I worked with Congress on a comprehensive fix. And last year, 68 Democrats, Republicans, and independents came together to pass a bipartisan bill in the Senate. It wasn't perfect. It was a compromise. But it reflected common sense. It would have doubled the number of Border Patrol agents while giving undocumented immigrants a pathway to citizenship if they paid a fine, started paying their taxes, and went to the back of the line. And independent experts said that it would help grow our economy and shrink our deficits. Had the House of Representatives allowed that kind of bill a simple yes or no vote, it would have passed with support from both parties. And today it would be the law. But for a year and a half now, Republican leaders in the House have refused to allow that simple vote. Now, I continue to believe that the best way to solve this problem is by working together to pass that kind of common sense law. But until that happens, there are actions I have the legal authority to take as president, the same kinds of actions taken by Democratic and Republican presidents before me, that will help make our immigration system more fair and more just. Tonight, I'm announcing those actions. First, we'll build on our progress at the border with additional resources for our law enforcement personnel so that they can stem the flow of illegal crossings and speed the return of those who do cross over. Second, I'll make it easier and faster for high-skilled immigrants, graduates, and entrepreneurs to stay and contribute to our economy, as so many business leaders have proposed. Third, we'll take steps to deal responsibly with the millions of undocumented immigrants who already live in our country. I want to say more about this third issue because it generates the most passion and controversy. Even as we are a nation of immigrants, we're also a nation of laws. Undocumented workers broke our immigration laws, and I believe that they must be held accountable, especially those who may be dangerous. That's why over the past 6 years, deportations of criminals are up 80%. And that's why we're going to keep focusing enforcement resources on actual threats to our security. Felons, not families. Criminals, not children. Gang members, not a mom who's working hard to provide for her kids. We'll prioritize, just like law enforcement does every day. But even as we focus on deporting criminals, the fact is millions of immigrants in every state, of every race and nationality, still live here illegally. And let's be honest, tracking down, rounding up, and deporting millions of people isn't realistic. Anyone who suggests otherwise isn't being straight with you. It's also not who we are as Americans. After all, most of these immigrants have been here a long time. They work hard, often in tough, low-paying jobs. They support their families. They worship at our churches. Many of their kids are American-born or spent most of their lives here. And their hopes, dreams, and patriotism are just like ours. As my predecessor, President Bush, once put it, they are a part of American life. Now, here's the thing. We expect people who live in this country to play by the rules. We expect that those who cut the line will not be unfairly rewarded. So we're going to offer the following deal. If you've been in America for more than 5 years, if you have children who are American citizens or legal residents, if you register, pass a criminal background check, and you're willing to pay your fair share of taxes, you'll be able to apply to stay in this country temporarily without fear of deportation. You can come out of the shadows and get right with the law. That's what this deal is. Now let's be clear about what it isn't. This deal does not apply to anyone who has come to this country recently. It does not apply to anyone who might come to America illegally in the future. It does not grant citizenship or the right to stay here permanently or offer the same benefits that citizens receive. Only Congress can do that. All we're saying is we're not going to deport you. I know some of the critics of this action call it amnesty. Well, it's not. Amnesty is the immigration system we have today. Millions of people who live here without paying their taxes or playing by the rules, while politicians use the issue to scare people and whip up votes at election time. That's the real amnesty, leaving this broken system the way it is. Mass amnesty would be unfair. Mass deportation would be both impossible and contrary to our character. What I'm describing is accountability, a common-sense middle ground approach. If you meet the criteria, you can come out of the shadows and get right with the law. If you're a criminal, you'll be deported. If you plan to enter the U.S. illegally, your chances of getting caught and sent back just went up. The actions I'm taking are not only lawful, they're the kinds of actions taken by every single Republican president and every single Democratic president for the past half-century. And to those members of Congress who question my authority to make our immigration system work better, or question the wisdom of me acting where Congress has failed, I have one answer. Pass a bill. I want to work with both parties to pass a more permanent legislative solution. And the day I sign that bill into law, the actions I take will no longer be necessary. Meanwhile, don't let a disagreement over a single issue be a deal breaker on every issue. That's not how our democracy works. And Congress certainly shouldn't shut down our government again just because we disagree on this. Americans are tired of gridlock. What our country needs from us right now is a common purpose, a higher purpose. Most Americans support the types of reforms I've talked about tonight, but I understand the disagreements held by many of you at home. Millions of us, myself included, go back generations in this country with ancestors who put in the painstaking work to become citizens. So we don't like the notion that anyone might get a free pass to American citizenship. I know some worry immigration will change the very fabric of who we are, or take our jobs, or stick it to middle-class families at a time when they already feel like they've gotten the raw deal for over a decade. I hear those concerns. But that's not what these steps would do. Our history and the facts show that immigrants are a net plus for our economy and our society. And I believe it's important that all of us have this debate without impugning each other's character. Because for all the back and forth of Washington, we have to remember that this debate is about something bigger. It's about who we are as a country and who we want to be for future generations. Are we a nation that tolerates the hypocrisy of a system where workers who pick our fruit and make our beds never have a chance to get right with the law? Or are we a nation that gives them a chance to make amends, take responsibility, and give their kids a better future? Are we a nation that accepts the cruelty of ripping children from their parents' arms? Or are we a nation that values families and works together to keep them together? Are we a nation that educates the world's best and brightest in our universities only to send them home to create businesses in countries that compete against us? Or are we a nation that encourages them to stay and create jobs here, create businesses here, create industries right here in America? That's what this debate is all about. We need more than politics as usual when it comes to immigration. We need reasoned, thoughtful, compassionate debate that focuses on our hopes, not our fears. I know the politics of this issue are tough, but let me tell you why I have come to feel so strongly about it. Over the past years, I've seen the determination of immigrant fathers who worked 2 or 3 jobs without taking a dime from the government and at risk any moment of losing it all just to build a better life for their kids. I've seen the heartbreak and anxiety of children whose mothers might be taken away from them just because they didn't have the right papers. I've seen the courage of students who, except for the circumstances of their birth, are as American as Malia or Sasha, students who bravely come out as undocumented in hopes they could make a difference in the country they love. These people, our neighbors, our classmates, our friends, they did not come here in search of a free ride or an easy life. They came to work and study and serve in our military and above all contribute to America's success. Tomorrow I'll travel to Las Vegas and meet with some of these students, including a young woman named Asserted Silva. Asserted was brought to America when she was 4 years old. Her only possessions were a cross, her doll, and the frilly dress she had on. When she started school, she didn't speak any English. She caught up to other kids by reading newspapers and watching PBS. And she became a good student. Her father worked in landscaping. Her mom cleaned other people's homes. They wouldn't let Astrid apply to a technology magnet school, not because they didn't love her, but because they were afraid the paperwork would out her as an undocumented immigrant. So she applied behind their back and got in. Still, she mostly lived in the shadows until her grandmother, who visited every year from Mexico, passed away. And she couldn't travel to the funeral without risk of being found out and deported. It was around that time she decided to begin advocating for herself and others like her. And today, Asserted Silva is a college student working on her 3rd degree. Are we a nation that kicks out a striving, hopeful immigrant like Asserted? Or are we a nation that finds a way to welcome her in? Scripture tells us that we shall not oppress a stranger, for we know the heart of a stranger. We were strangers once too. My fellow Americans, we are and always will be a nation of immigrants. We were strangers once too. And whether our forebears were strangers who crossed the Atlantic or the Pacific or the Rio Grande, we are here only because this country welcomed them in and taught them that to be an American is about something more than what we look like or what our last names are or how we worship. What makes us Americans is our shared commitment to an ideal, that all of us are created equal, and all of us have the chance to make of our lives what we will. That's the country our parents and grandparents and generations before them built for us. That's the tradition we must uphold. That's the legacy we must leave for those who are yet to come. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless this country we love.
And there you have it, President Obama addressing the nation tonight. I want to back up for just a minute and go back, take a look at those 3 executive actions in specific that he talked about tonight. We'll bring in the panel after that. But again, this is cracking down, he says, on illegal immigration at the border. He will continue to do so. We'll be discussing that issue because, as the president mentioned, he has been very strong in terms of cracking down on border crossings. Deporting felons, not families. What does that ultimately look like? And accountability, criminal background checks, as well as paying taxes. And the pathway, he says, to citizenship. This is not, as the president says, blanket amnesty. Joining me now is Ms. Palma Yanni, a practicing immigration attorney, right here in D.C. with me, and Gabriel Gutierrez, the director for the Center for Study of the Peoples of the Americas and a professor in the Department of Chicano Studies at California State University, Northridge. Thank you both for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
So let me begin here, Palma, because what am I missing here? You know, the media has been hyping this story. The president's about to take some huge sweeping action into unilaterally giving citizenship to 5 million people. Not at all what happened here tonight. It seems like this was more hype than anything else because these actions really aren't anything staggering, are they?
No, they're not. And they are actions that, excuse me, many past presidents have taken. What galls, I guess is the word, the Republicans, is that perhaps from the advance information we received, as many as 5 million individuals may benefit from this temporary reprieve from deportation. And they will be able to work legally for a 3-year period, and they will be able to, well, they're required to pay their taxes, and of course they have to go through background checks, which again, they're already here. Mm-hmm. There's no possible way that these people could be deported en masse. And wouldn't you rather have them paying taxes, know who they are, do the background checks, concentrate on people that are at risk that you don't want in the U.S.? I mean, it is so common sense. But
yeah, well, yeah. And Gabriel, to that point, I mean, I think what Palma's bringing up here is really important. But at the end of the day, I've heard pundits, we all love pundits, right, kind of pontificating about this issue and saying, well, it's because of the size of this, the mass of this, and that's why it's so unique and shocking to people. But look, at the end of the day, we have seen the numbers rise at this incredible rate. Something like since 1990, we've gone from 3.5 million illegal immigrants to 11 million here in 2014. At some point, you have to do something with these people, and deportation cannot possibly be a reasonable answer for 5 million people.
Absolutely, and I think that not only that, but when we look at the larger context of it, we look at the fact that much of the rhetoric that comes in that Obama has been basically resting his deportation policies on are very narrow and very shallow, I might say. I mean, you're talking about a country that's existed for 238 years, who's claiming to have the moral authority to deport, to regulate the migration of people who have been on this continent for tens of thousands, and according to some scholarly estimates, hundreds of thousands of years. Now, what gives the United States the moral authority to do that, again, given the small time frame? And so much of the debate, much of the discussion, even in terms of the advanced information that we were getting, is being scrutinized in a very ahistorical sense. You know, it's in many ways being assessed. And I've heard people lauding these numbers and people talking about how impactful this is. But when we look at basically Obama's predecessor, in one of the predecessors anyway, in this area, Ronald Reagan, when he passed or when he signed off on IRCA, you had people doing the same thing, talking about how he grounded families and so on and so forth. What they didn't talk about was how effectively IRCA was also about closing the borders. So what we're going through now was not intended to happen based on the language in IRCA. And so in many ways, when we're looking at this as a historical moment, there's a lot to be said about not only this one act, and really the question that probably should be asked is it too little too late for Obama? Because we really need to look at what really initiated this type of an action. And in many ways, you know, we have a lame duck president who pretty much is taking on an issue that he refused to take on. Well, actually, I shouldn't say he refused to take on. He took it on very well to the point of deporting 2.3+ million in his first 6 years in office.
Gabriel, let me ask you about that, because I think that's an important issue as well. Look, this president had the full of Congress when he first came into office. He had the Senate, he had the House. Right. He did not do anything in terms of anything sweeping for immigration reform. And as you pointed out, actually, what he said tonight about criminal deportations being up 80%, that is factually correct. However, Palma, beyond that, just immigration deportation in general is up significantly under this president, is it not?
Yes, it is.
So at this point, is it too little too late for this president to try to make the case that, no, I'm really looking for some kind of substantial immigration reform, or is this just politics as usual?
He's at the point where something had to be done. Because, and it's not just politics. I mean, the system, as everybody keeps saying, is broken. Mm-hmm. And he really did. I mean, we got a bill that, you know, nobody loved through the Senate because it was a compromise, as he mentioned, and the House simply wouldn't move. And at some point, you don't have an option. And what he's doing is, it's clearly within his powers. There isn't any question about that. Virtually every president, definitely every in the last 50 years, has done a similar deferred action status or granting a temporary reprieve, from Bush with the Chinese students to deferred and forced departure for Salvadorans. These covered hundreds of thousands of people. Mm-hmm. They didn't cover millions, but they covered hundreds of thousands. And when you look at the percentage, perhaps, of undocumented people then, as opposed to now, it probably comes out to be pretty similar to what past presidents have done. And again, it's just, it's collecting the taxes, it's doing the background checks so you actually know who's here, and then having people, if you strengthen with the IRCA problem that was mentioned by our other panelist, was when you can be employed under the table, and you're not necessarily paying taxes, and employers are not paying minimum wage, let alone a fair wage, that has a negative effect across the economy. And so when you grant the work authorization, and part of this is a stronger enforcement of the work site documentation to make sure that people will be authorized to work then in order to get jobs, that is one of the major things that stops the influx, which is already much lower than it's been, it stops the influx of the new immigrants, because if you can't work, and people come here to work. And
you make the point that the influx right now is actually lower, and it is lower than it has been. This past summer, there was an anomaly, certainly, with those undocumented children who were coming here without parents and guardians. But that was an anomaly in terms of the system, not what necessarily Drudge Report would tell you, but that was an anomaly in the system. Gabriel, though, it sounds like, I mean, clearly you're frustrated, and I think a lot of folks are frustrated with this president and where he's been. But let me ask you this: he talks about, you know, we can't just leave essentially a permanent underclass of people, which is what we have right now in this country, and people who are abused through this system. What can this president do through this process that you would say at least he's taking that step?
Well, let me go back a little bit and say that for those people that will be positively affected, it is a huge impact for them. I mean, they get to stay. I mean, that is the bottom line. They're gonna get themselves into a situation, or they're gonna be put into a situation where they're gonna be able to sleep at night knowing that the following day they're not gonna be deported. But it becomes problematic when I'm talking about it being too little, too late. What about the reunification of the families of those 2.3 million in the first 6 years? We're not even accounting for 2014. But what about the reunification of those families that include veterans who joined the military and then who were deported as a result of their status? Many of them having joined under the auspices of thinking that it would expedite their
path to citizenship. It would be a path to citizenship. Sure. I want to play something for you guys real quick. 22 times President Obama has said in speeches that he could not act alone on this issue, saying he's not an emperor, not a king. Listen to this.
This notion that somehow I can just change the laws unilaterally is just not true.
And sometimes when I talk to immigration advocates, you know, they wish I could just bypass Congress and change the law myself. But that's not how democracy works.
What I've said is that there's a path to get this done, and that's through Congress.
You know, I'm the President of the United States. I'm not the Emperor of the United States. My job is to execute laws that are passed. We are a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws. If, in fact, I could solve all these problems without passing laws in Congress, then I would do so. But we're also a nation of laws. That's part of our tradition. The biggest problems that we're facing right now have to do with George Bush trying to bring more and more power into the executive branch and not go through Congress at all. And that's what I intend to reverse when I'm President of the United States of America.
So there's obviously, as I mentioned, 22 examples of this. I just want to make the point tonight, because there's been so much media talk about this. This president tonight did not attempt to unilaterally create blanket amnesty. He did not attempt to usurp the Constitution and declare citizenship. What he did say tonight is he is attempting to prioritize the office that he's in and sending down these memos to the offices that respond to the executive branch to prioritize where money goes and where attention goes. We're running short on time, so let me give you both a chance to weigh in on that. Is he prioritizing, Palma, the right things here?
Absolutely. What he's talking about is finding out who's dangerous and who's not. And the people that have lived here peaceably, complying with all laws, except their immigration status, which is civil, they get to pay taxes and stay here for at least 3 years, which is, it's limited, but that's because he's not the king and he can't change laws. And people that commit crimes, are felons, are dangerous, will be deported. That's the priorities. That makes sense.
And as you mentioned, the president is not changing the law here. He's prioritizing. Gabriel, let me ask you, what should be the next prioritization here? Last word.
Let me just actually say something about this. When you look at the 2013 deportation numbers, first of all, 100% of the deportees were all from Latin America. The second thing is that over 40% of those who were deported had no past criminal record. The American Immigration Council notes that simple misdemeanor type of crimes committed by immigrants are often, through Congress, defined as aggravated felonies or felonies, which criminalizes the behavior of these immigrants. The very fact that we talk about the term illegal, right, was not illegal historically. It's something that was socially constructed in order to make it a crime. So now it becomes a crime for immigrants who are here as undocumented immigrants to search for a job, for example. Right, as in states like like Arizona and Alabama and other states like that. So what happens is the criminalization of acts that are not criminal puts them on a path to being deported as criminal elements.
Well, and you're making a very important point there. Tonight on Twitter, some folks were messaging back and forth using the hashtag #AsYouWish, making the exact point that you're making, Gabriel, which is that ultimately borders are arbitrary and that this is a law that's been constructed, but there is no violent offense against anyone else. So viewing it as a criminal act in that respect is mistaken, they say. So great discussion. Appreciate you both. Gabriel Gutierrez from Los Angeles today, and Ms. Palma Yani, thank you both so much for being with us this evening.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
We'll go ahead and listen in live.
My fellow Americans, tonight I'd like to talk with you about immigration. For more than 200 years, our tradition of welcoming immigrants from around the world has given us a tremendous advantage over other nations. It's kept us youthful, dynamic, and entrepreneurial. It has shaped our character as a people with limitless possibilities. People not trapped by our past, but able to remake ourselves as we choose. But today, our immigration system is broken, and everybody knows it. Families who enter our country the right way and play by the rules watch others flout the rules. Business owners who offer their workers good wages and benefits see the competition exploit undocumented immigrants by paying them far less. All of us take offense to anyone who reaps the rewards of living in America without taking on the responsibilities of living in America. And undocumented immigrants who desperately want to embrace those responsibilities see little option but to remain in the shadows or risk their families being torn apart. It's been this way for decades. And for decades, we haven't done much about it. When I took office, I committed to fixing this broken immigration system. And I began by doing what I could to secure our borders, Today, we have more agents and technology deployed to secure our southern border than at any time in our history. And over the past 6 years, illegal border crossings have been cut by more than half. Although this summer there was a brief spike in unaccompanied children being apprehended at our border, the number of such children is now actually lower than it's been in nearly 2 years. Overall, the number of people trying to cross our border illegally is at its lowest level since the 1970s. Those are the facts. Meanwhile, I worked with Congress on a comprehensive fix. Undocumented workers broke our immigration laws, and I believe that they must be held accountable, especially those who may be dangerous. That's why over the past 6 years, deportations of criminals are up 80%. And that's why we're going to keep focusing enforcement resources on actual threats to our security. Felons, not families. Criminals, not children. Gang members, not a mom who's working hard to provide for her kids. We'll prioritize, just like law enforcement does every day. But even as we focus on deporting criminals, the fact is millions of immigrants in every state, of every race and nationality, still live here illegally. And let's be honest, tracking down, rounding up, and deporting millions of people isn't realistic. Anyway, there are actions I have the legal authority to take as president, the same kinds of actions taken by Democratic and Republican presidents before me, that will help make our immigration system more fair and more just. Tonight, I'm announcing those actions. First, we'll build on our progress at the border with additional resources for our law enforcement personnel, so that they can stem the flow of illegal crossings and speed the return of those who do cross over. Second, I'll make it easier and faster for high-skilled immigrants, graduates, and entrepreneurs to stay and contribute to our economy, as so many business leaders have proposed. Third, we'll take steps to deal responsibly with the millions of undocumented immigrants who already live in our country. I want to say more about this third issue because it generates the most passion and controversy. Even as we are a nation of immigrants, we're also a nation of laws. And last year, 68 Democrats, Republicans, and independents came together to pass a bipartisan bill in the Senate. It wasn't perfect. It was a compromise, but it reflected common sense. It would have doubled the number of Border Patrol agents while giving undocumented immigrants a pathway to citizenship if they paid a fine, started paying their taxes, and went to the back of the line. And independent experts said that it would help grow our economy and shrink our deficits. Had the House of Representatives allowed that kind of bill a simple yes or no vote, it would have passed with support from both parties. And today it would be the law. But for a year and a half now, Republican leaders in the House have refused to allow that simple vote. Now, I continue to believe that the best way to solve this problem is by working together to pass that kind of common sense law. But until that happens,